Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF, CPAs and advisors here in Bethesda. Our mission here on the Exit Readiness Podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable business value and for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and so that you can exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. And our topic for today's episode, how to become the firm everyone wants to buy.
And Pat, the gentleman who's going to tell us that is our guest, Lee Frederiksen, PhD, who's the managing partner of Hinge. Hinge provides branding and marketing for professional service firms. Lee's an award-winning marketer. He's a visible expert. He'll have to tell us what that means. And business strategist who helped pioneer the field of research-driven marketing. As the managing partner of Hinge, a marketing firm for the professional services industry, he draws on his PhD in behavioral psychology as well as his CEO experience to help clients achieve high growth and profitability. Lee's research on marketing and business growth has made him a recognized industry name, along with the numerous books he has authored on the same topic. He's been quoted in a number of mainstream publications, and he regularly speaks at major industry events around the country. Pat, as you recall, we heard Lee speak at the annual BEI conference in August out in Denver, and he was fantastic. When he's not traveling to speaking engagements or working at the Hinge headquarters, you'll find Lee pursuing his interest in hot rods or watching movies with his wife, Candace. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. And I love the topic, too.
Yeah, good. That's good. So just to repeat our topic today, how to become the firm everyone wants to buy is based on research that you and Hinge have performed. So, Lee, can you tell us about the research just to get us started?
Sure. One of the things that we have done is, since really the beginning of Hinge, is we have focused on offering the services and solutions to the clients that are based on what actually works in the real world. So we said, we're not going to offer this service or that service until we figure out what the most effective firms do. And that started a process that's gone on for 10 years where we followed, it's upwards now 30,000 professional services firms and looked at what those that are growing the fastest and are most profitable, what are they doing that's different than the average or the slow-growing firms? So that's the basis. And each year we add about 1,000 to 1,200 brand new firms to the sample. So it's really an unusually large sample and a one that is kind of showing how the landscape is changing for professional services.
Yeah, and so Lee, what types of firms would you categorize or consider to be professional services firms in your research? And then how are these professional services firms, how are professional services buyers, if you will, changing?
Okay, sure. Well, the firms we're looking at fall within the broad categories of architecture, engineering, and construction, accounting and financial services, and consulting and technology companies. And kind of the characteristic that unites them all is that first and foremost, you're selling your expertise. And more, that expertise is sometimes wrapped in with a piece of software or with something, but it always has a core of professional expertise. So that's what's defining them. And the firms themselves are growing at least 20% a year, compound annual growth. That's sort of our bottom of the criteria to be called a high growth firm. So that sort of sets up what the firms are. Now, the question about buyers is a really an interesting one. When I started back in the professional services many years ago, the way you got business was a rainmaker. That was basically it. You went out, you established relationships with people, you got to know them, you served on boards of not-for-profits. And through these relationships, over time, you developed a client base. Most of it was local, and the notion was that, well, professional services will always be local because well, you got to be face to face, you got to have trust, you got to have those things. Well, what we've learned is that the onset of the internet has really turned that almost upside down. And now people have access to all kinds of expertise, information that was never available before. And so where people look for services is beginning to change. It's changing in terms of geography. People are tending to look much broader in terms of where they will consider working with someone. And it's also changing in terms of how they go about finding firms or researching problems. These days, it almost always starts with an online search of some type, and then usually supplemented by a webinar or podcasts or white papers or something you download to educate yourself about a topic. And that is something that's relatively new. And you see a lot of that coming out in terms of the buyer being more in control. But what's happening is people are relying yet less on their friends, less turning to someone for advice, and more on doing a little research online, learning a little bit about the topic before they consider who they want to work with.
Yeah, so Lee, just a follow-up to that. So if your research, your observations, as you've observed professional firms being bought, are the firms that still have that framework of the rainmaker or rainmakers, are they being less valued, and are they considered less attractive then by potential buyers than, let's say, a firm that has what you would call a strategic marketing plan and program strategy in place?
I think the simple answer is yes. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that a firm that really relies on a small number of rainmakers has risk associated with it. And you have the risk if that person leaves or is no longer with the firm, there goes your source of new business. So I think it's pretty safe to say that buyers are more attracted to something where you have a strong brand, where the firm itself, its reputation as a firm attracts it, and they have a strategic marketing plan in place that gives them leads and opportunities that go beyond their personal and individual networking, because that allows you to have something that's scalable and does not rely on the talents of an owner or one or two people who may leave the firm at any particular point.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, from a valuation standpoint, a company's value is based on its anticipated cash flow, which comes down, one of the factors there is how risky is that cash flow. And if you're talking, any part of a business that is reliant on one or two individuals just automatically makes that cash flow more risky. So that definitely makes sense. So Lee, let me ask you, so what are that's incredible, 20% per year growth. That's really impressive. What are these high growth firms doing differently than other firms?
That's a great question. And as I said, we've spent 10 years trying to get to the bottom of all of those things. And it changes over time, some of the techniques and so forth they use. But I would say it boils down to several principles that are pretty much universal across these. One of those is there's some level usually of specialization. They don't try to be everything to everyone. They've got a niche or a series of niches that are relatively stable or protectable, and they're really focused on owning those niches or those segments of the marketplace. So that's one of the big characteristics. A second big characteristic is that they tend to make an investment in internal training and marketing in general that tends to be a bit more intensive than their peers who don't grow. And the third thing that I think really jumps out at is the techniques they use to reach the audience more closely mirror where the audience is these days. A little bit earlier, we mentioned that, more and more the audience tends to be going online to research issues. Should I be worrying about transfer payments, or, how do I deal with this particular legal issue, or something along those lines? They're trying to figure those out, and the easiest thing is to just Google it, go online and find something. So you tend to see that the higher growing firms put more of their marketing emphasis on the digital or online aspect of marketing as compared to the traditional face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball handshakes.
Got it. Hey, Lee, can I go back for a second to we were talking about the rainmaker model versus, having a robust marketing strategy in place and valuation. Would you say that a professional services firm that has both in place, they still have the rainmaker paradigm, if you will, but they've also done a good job at putting in place a robust marketing strategy, so they have both working for them? Would you say that firm would be more valuable to a potential buyer as a professional services firm, or would the professional services firm that only has the robust marketing strategy, which, generally speaking, based on all that you've observed and researched, which do you think could be most valuable?
It's a great question. And I think the way I would think about the answer to that is going back to the earlier comment that y'all made, and that is about the risk associated with the revenue stream. If it has both, and those rainmakers are locked in, they have employment contracts, they have ownership. If they're locked in a way, then that gives a more diverse, approach to generating business. So yeah, that can have value. However, if it's something like 70% of your business comes in based on the contacts of one retired general, and that general is approaching retirement age, then it's a completely different set of facts, and I think would have a negative impact on your ability to sell that business at a premium price.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. That substantiates what we would think to be true and what we've observed, right, Walter?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting, in the years to come, because I look at our firm, and we have our group of partners that run the firm now. We're kind of the second generation. We're for the most part in our early 60s. So we still grew up in the environment where going out face to face, picking up business is a critical piece of what we do. But it's interesting because the younger group, the one behind us, they're not as used to doing that because we've all we've kind of segregated that to the people who do it well do it, and those who don't do it so well, they don't have to worry about it. But as we start to leave, we always worry about, where's the next group of clients going to come? We have a group of partners who maybe aren't so, they aren't rainmakers, quote unquote. So hopefully what we've done, and I think what you would say is really important, is as you get into the next generations of a professional services firm, having that really strong marketing program in place like you've described it is really critical to the success of the firm, whether it's sold or whether it's just taken over by the next group of owners.
Yeah, and these aspects that you mentioned, you listed a few minutes ago, Lee: specialization, investment in marketing and training, techniques that mirror the behaviors of customers. I got a question about the specialization. That's always, it seems like it's always, a fearful prospect for a business owner, be it a professional services firm or any firm, to go more narrow, right? And to specialize. What would be your thoughts about that fear, if you will?
Yeah. It's a great question, and other people have observed it, and as it turns out, it actually has something to do with how we're wired as people, as organisms. Basically, our wiring is such that we're more concerned about a loss than we are foregoing the potential for a gain. We are more risk adverse as organisms than we are open to opportunity. And that's about a 2-to-1 edge in terms of the intensity of the emotion. So what that means is you have a lot of people who are afraid of losing something by specializing. They're afraid, oh my gosh, someone will come in that's not in that specialty and I won't get them as a client. What they don't realize is that the actual reality of the situation is that the amount you gain in ease of attracting people and ease of closing by some level of specialization usually far exceeds what little that you lose by trying to be a generalist. If you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing special to anyone. And that's just the reality. Now, the way we have helped a lot of our clients kind of get around that psychology, if you will, is basically say, look, you don't have to give up anything. Just focus on a specialty and try to accelerate that. Don't give up the other stuff. And what inevitably happens is the growth and the excitement and they have within the specialty just begins to take over their attention. And that's where the business ends up going. And the stuff they were so worried about losing, in the end, they never miss it all.
Yeah, well, we run into those psychological issues quite often. In your white paper, Strategic Marketing for Professional Services, and by the way, you guys produce some phenomenal resources and collateral free. It's just tremendous. I love the content that you produce. And in this white paper, Strategic Marketing for Professional Services, when you're talking about niche specialization, one of the points you make, Lee, is about practical limitations. Practical limitations such as geographic location and marketing have limited this a niche specialization approach. And how do you address that? Just the practical limitations.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll share a little story with you that, as you know, we're located in Reston, Virginia here, and we got a call a number of years ago from a organization that was just down the street. And this was at a time when we were looking at opening another office on the West Coast in San Francisco. And the person who was right down the street, they said, can you send us over a proposal to rebrand our firm? And we said, yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, let's get together and, talk it through and so forth. They said, no. We're really busy. They said, we know what you do. We've been following you for a couple of years. Can you just send us the proposal? And of course, this was against all our processes. And so very reluctantly, we said, okay, we'll send you a proposal. So we did. And of course, we didn't hear anything. And we thought, see, we shouldn't have, shame on us for violating our own process. And then I got a call and they said, okay, we're ready to go. And you could have, brushed me over with a feather. Like, really? I said, don't you want to talk to us? Or no. Your proposal was very comprehensive. We know, what you do. We're very familiar with your kind of work you do, and we want to get started. Only later did I find out that they'd done a whole selection process and they'd had, different organizations in there. But the reality of it is they didn't feel like they needed to. They felt like they knew who we were and our approach and what we would do based on the content we had done. So it wasn't a matter of convenience or not convenience. It was more a matter of, do you develop trust in there? And what the big learning is there's multiple ways to develop trust. And being eyeball to eyeball with someone is one way of doing it, but it's only one way. When I was growing up, that was back in the old days of television when there were just three major networks and they each had the news. I remember the most trusted man in America was Walter Cronkite. Had you ever met Walter Cronkite? No. But, you develop trust with familiarity. You develop trust with repetition. You develop trust with someone being authoritative. There's a whole series of things you do to develop trust, and only one of them is being face-to-face with a person. So I think the upshot of that is we have to be careful about the assumptions we make about how people behave and what is possible and what's not, and what works and what doesn't. Now, to answer the practical side of your question, yeah, there are practical limits. I mean, if you are in a place that does not have any manufacturing and you want to specialize in manufacturing, boy, you're at a disadvantage. However, within that, as long as you don't go overboard with a practical limitation, there is a lot more flexibility in terms of specialization and focus than there ever has been. And this has changed dramatically within the last 5 years. So what was true when I was a pup is no longer true today.
Okay, very good. Lee, in the work that Walter and I do in helping owners exit on their own terms and condition, we've been talking about high growth. We would consider that, of course, high growth as certainly being an advantage for an owner who wants to exit, as it's sure to impact the business valuation and generate more interested buyers. What advantages do you see that high growth firms would have regarding their exit over slower growth firms?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think the growth and the profitability certainly speak directly to expected cash flow in the future. But the other thing that I kind of mentioned that's very important is the kind of specialization or focus, and and the reason that's so important is that is important for strategic buyers, those that are trying to add a specific capability. We did a study a number of years ago after the 9/11 and when we were in the Iraq War, and where so many government contractors were really trying to add certain kind of intel experience and credibility. And I remember at the time we were doing this one valuation of a firm really caught my attention. It was 10 times revenue. 10 times revenue for the valuation. And I thought, holy cow, why is that? And we talked to the buyer and they said, look, they had expertise and contracts working with a certain 3-letter agency that it would have taken us years and years to replicate, and we can just get it, and we need it, and we need it now. That's how you sell at these astronomical valuations. Is, as I'm sure you very well know and counsel your clients, is if it fits into a firm's strategic plan and it is the missing piece that they must have, that's really a bonus.
Okay, so now you just mentioned strategic buyers, and what about financial buyers? Would you have any comments about private equity and financial buyers?
Well, there again, the private equity, oftentimes there is an inherent or implied strategy that's behind that. I mean, sometimes it's fairly simple one, and I would think in that case, your financial buyer is going to be more concerned with your cash flow and your profitability and the risk associated with that. I think are probably going to be the primary drivers in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, and also a comment. I think we're talking about having a high growth firm is going to definitely increase your valuation multiples, which I fully agree with. The other thing is, I think if you have a high growth firm, and that assumes it's profitable and everything else, which you would kind of assume it would be. I think the other aspect of the whole exit planning is that it really opens up the door for almost every exit option. Because I'm thinking, Pat and I have done a few deals in the past couple of years working with transitions to internal buyers, key employees, that type of thing. And if it's a slow growing firm or a flat firm, it just makes it very risky because the owner is going to be taking back a note from those buyers. It just adds a whole level of risk to it. If you have a high growth firm, that helps to account for that. I think also if you look at ESOPs, in the right situation, high growth firm would help there. And even if you want to have family in the business, I mean, anytime you have a well run firm, it just makes the transition to that next buyer, whatever type of buyer it is, just that much easier.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a strategic buyer who buys. That's all he does is buy firms. And I said, well, what would you do? What would you recommend to people who wanted to be able to sell their firm? And he said, run it as though you are not going to sell it.
Right.
Put in place the long-term things you need to do. Don't skimp on your marketing or your infrastructure. Don't skimp on your training. Make sure you got a stable workforce. Do the things you would do if you plan to be there.
Yeah, well, a couple of weeks ago we had Corby McGordon with us, and we were talking about the importance of a growth plan in regard to valuation and a successful exit, of course. And one of the key points we made during the conversation was that, when you go to sell, if you decide that you're going to sell to a third party, be it strategic or private equity, you're selling future cash flow and profitability. And so wouldn't it be great to start your negotiations out at a much higher number, because you can prove your growth. You can prove it, your past growth, of course, with the numbers, but then also you can slide across the table, if you will. Here's our growth plan. Here's our robust strategic marketing growth plan. This is how we've accomplished it in the past. It's scalable. It's documented. It's in place. And here's why we want 10 times revenue, and we expect to get it. Right?
Indeed. Of course, it removes the risk.
So, Lee, I noticed when I was introducing you, one of the things I mentioned about you is that you are a visible expert, and in our printed sheet here, it has the registered trademark next to it. So, what is a visible expert?
A visible expert is our term for an individual who has made their expertise tangible and visible. The problem with expertise is that if you meet someone and you shake hands with them, you can't tell whether they're an expert or not an expert. The only way you know that is either through something they've written, some kind of speaking, or some kind of conversation and extended networking with them. Can you understand that person's expertise? And what a visible expert is someone who makes their expertise visible and tangible through doing those kinds of things. What we have learned is that visible experts are really the new rainmakers, if you will. They're the ones that help attract business to firms. And that's true whether that visible expert, that visible expert could be the world's biggest introvert. But if they're a good writer and their expertise comes through in that, they'll still attract business to the firm. And so that is the key, is making your expertise and the expertise of the firm visible to others. Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is we found that, just in general, when you look at visible experts, those that have done that successfully, on the average, it takes them about 5 years to progress up one level of expertise. And we've identified 5 different levels of expertise. So basically, some people spend their entire careers getting to that point. What we have found is that if you approach it strategically and you do the research on your markets and you use the techniques that match with your audience's preference, you can shorten that time from about 5 years to about 1 year to go up a level of perceived expertise. And that's a tremendous ability to do that, and really has a big impact on your ability to generate leads and new business.
Yeah, so I'm not sure this is an appropriate question, but let me ask it anyway. How does someone get started? I mean, is that just way too simplistic, or what do you think?
I don't think it's too simplistic. There are different ways of doing that. One of the things we've done is we've developed a whole visible expert program. So we have one of our business units is something called Hinge University, and it has a course on becoming a visible expert. So that's the way some people do it. They buy a couple books, they study up on it, they learn how to do it, they develop their plan, they get the tools they need in place, and they have the discipline to execute upon it. So that's what it involves. The first thing is understanding what you want to be an expert in, and that's an important strategic choice. You don't want to try to be an expert in something far too broad, nor do you want to be an expert in something that's so narrow that even if you got all the clients interested in that, it wouldn't be enough to make a living. So that's the first hurdle, is figuring out what's your area of expertise. The second one about developing your expertise in that area is oftentimes one of the easier hurdles if someone is dedicated to doing it. It's usually because they're attracted to something they have an affinity for and they have curiosity around it. And it becomes almost a hobby or something they want to learn about, their area of expertise. And then the third part, of course, is making that visible. And that's really a function of understanding where your audience looks for information and being in the places they're looking.
It's fantastic. Hey, Lee, as we begin to close here, thanks again for this time, by the way. Great, phenomenal content. I'm a huge fan of yours and Hinge ever since I first heard you speak at the conference this summer. If someone's listening, well, first off, do you have any other comments or recommendations here that we haven't asked you the question about, or something that's come to mind that we haven't talked about yet that you can put in here toward the end?
Yeah, I enjoy this stuff so much. It's hard for me not to keep sharing everything, but I would say one thing to keep in mind is that we're all faced with this balance between doing the work and servicing our clients versus developing new business. And this is particularly true if you have a seller-doer model kind of in your organization. And that is a tricky balance. But the thing I would give as a takeaway is set aside, budget a certain amount of time to spend on marketing and business development, and do that repeatedly, because it's that consistency over time that really has the biggest impact. And the most single most important time to do this is when you are too busy with client work. When you got too much client work, that's when it's most important to do the business development. So that's the thought I would leave you with.
That's great advice there. Great last thought. If someone's listening today, Lee, and they want to contact you and Hinge for help, how would they do that?
The most direct way is to go to our website. It's Hinge Marketing, Hinge, like the thing on your door, hingemarketing.com.
Fantastic. And, we like to ask guests if there's anything that they're currently promoting that they'd like to mention. Like you guys have so many, like I said earlier, resources, an event, whatever, book, whatever. Is there anything that you'd like to promote today?
We are just finishing collecting data on our 2020 high growth study. And if you go to our website, there will be an opportunity to participate in the study there. And I would encourage people to do that because everybody who participates gets a copy of the research summary. And it's a great way to see what the high growth firms are doing and to get some tips and tricks for free.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much, Lee. Appreciate the time today. I'm sure we'll have you back at some point in the future if you're willing to come back.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Listeners, if you want help in marketing and putting together a strategy, a robust marketing strategy, particularly if you're a professional services firm, especially if you're a professional services firm, we can highly recommend Lee and his organization. And if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Walter at 301-951-9090, or you can reach me at 301-859-0860. You can also access resources at exitreadiness.com, grfcpa.com, and nslp.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dial signing off.